Good morning, everyone. You're listening to Scott and Shane here on Prepper Talk Radio. How you doing this morning, Scott?
I am doing fan-freaking-tastic.
Can I hear you?
I don't know. It's
let's
not
pause
my
for
mic.
a second here. I'm not hearing it either.
It's reading on the dial, but it's not. Hello? Nope, not that one.
All right,
Hello,
we'll
hello.
just keep going until our callers tell us. And
Drop
say,
your
no, we're not.
drop the background noise. Let's see if we can hear me then.
Check,
like
testing,
down.
testing. 1, 2.
I can't hear you in my headset.
Well, we're moving on the dial, so let's just keep going.
Yeah. Hopefully we're out there. If you can hear us, call in. If you can't hear us, call in. Our number is 801-254-1640 because we are on AM 1640 now. And as usual, this is Prepper Talk Radio every Friday from 10 to 11. I don't know, for broadcasting.
Well, we'll just keep going.
Woohoo!
All right, so today we have been thinking about this topic for a while, and it was one brought up by one of our listeners. And, it had been on our long list of items as well to talk about, and it is very much related to many of the other topics we talk about. So I guess at the risk of being a bit redundant, we're going to get into this topic. So, Scott, what is this topic? What did this one commenter want to talk about?
The reason we're on this topic is because we've had a lot of requests from listeners. How do I prep in my area? What do I do? And it kind of became more of a regional question as opposed to just a, urban versus country or rural versus suburban, right? And so those are part of the factors today, but I really want to talk about what are you doing in your local area and what different types of things you need to prepare for that are different than other regions. For example, here in the high mountains of Utah, it's not every day that we experience anything close to hurricane, right? Unless PrepperCon's in town and they bring in their hurricane simulator, then, okay, yeah, we can experience that for a few bucks, but as a whole, we don't experience that. But then in Florida, they do. But do they ever experience blizzards? No, they do not. We do. They do not.
Maybe
we got a caller.
Someday.
Let's see if they can hear us.
All right, let me turn this on here and let's do this right. Yes, you're live here on Prepper Talk Radio.
You're broadcasting.
Okay, good. Thank you.
So
I
you
appreciate
can't hear
it.
us.
Go.
Awesome.
We just can't hear ourselves on our monitors here in the studio for some reason. So another little technical glitch. But thanks for letting us know. We'll just watch the needles and know that we're broadcasting. Did you have any comments or anything while you're here?
You're the only practical show on K-Talk because everybody else just complains about the problem, and you're actually doing something about it because eventually we will need our food storages. The way things are going in this country, we will need those.
No doubt about it.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
your
very
comment.
much.
That's I kind of agree with you. All right, I'll let you go. Thank you much for the call. And that's what we really try and do. We try to be practical. We've mentioned before we don't really like to talk politics, although they do come into play. We can definitely talk about what happened in Las Vegas, how to prepare for that, and maybe we'll take a segment one day to talk about what you can do to prepare for that. We don't want to complain about it. We're not going to get into politics of it, but what can you do to prepare?
Psychologically speaking or mentally speaking, I mean, you go back to the premise of why we prep. If you're prepared, you shall not fear, right? The LDS mindset is supposed to be driven towards that, right? But I also take it a next step further. If you're prepared, you won't fear. But if you eliminate fear, your mind gets clear, and you know exactly what needs to be done. You can make better decisions, choices, plans. It's funny because one of our friends she just became the Ward Emergency Preparedness Coordinator. My wife is the Ward Preparedness Emergency Coordinator, and we talk a lot about lists, action plans, charts, maps, all the things you need to be doing, and it's simple to just run down the checklist line of thinking, but one of the most impressive things to me is someone who has primitive skills, someone who then takes it a little step further and has fire skills, has of all different types, shelter building skills of all different types. Obviously, there's different things you can do based on where you are. I mean, for example, Arizona, I lived there for a long time. What kind of shelter can I build in my environment?
And you're in a very arid climate. So
there's
you
really
don't,
no options.
Exactly.
So if I don't have a tarp in my bag, I'm kind of screwed. And so
you need the shade. You need protection from rain,
Yep.
wind,
Yep.
but not so much temperatures in all seasons, right? So it's
Right,
not as critical
It gets really cold at
at night in the desert.
But the spring and fall, it's interesting because you can have 90 degrees in the day, and then you can have almost freezing weather at night, depending on where you are. Now, obviously in Phoenix, that's not the case. But if you go into the mountains that surround that area, you can have that happen. But there's not a whole lot of trees that you can fashion a nice lean-to shelter with.
That's
you
true.
You can't just go over and lob a
Cut down some
saguaro
cactus,
down and
right, and build a shelter
saguaro
out
cactus,
of
because that's their state tree. That would be against the law, and
Right.
you would be fined for that if you survived.
Right.
It'd most likely
you
fall
survived,
on
but
you.
hey, we're going to throw you in jail anyway. Cause
Yeah. So congratulations, dummy.
So, we're talking about prepping for your particular environment where you find yourself most of the time. And I think most of the time, most of us, and this is pretty obvious observation on my part, is that most of us find ourselves in the city most of the time. So I think we're going to spend most of our time talking about city prepping. So we got a phone call. Let's bring him in and see what they've got to say. You're live here on Prepper Talk Radio. You have a question or comment for us? Are you there? Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, my name is Travis. I'm from the East Coast, and I do a lot of your podcasts.
Oh,
and
fantastic.
I found y'all's information very informative and kind of makes me think outside the box about a few things.
Good.
But I got a question. I got a couple of critiques.
Of course.
Please.
I barely
Absolutely.
hear you on the podcast. I barely hear you.
Okay.
I have to turn the volume all the way up.
Okay.
Anyway, also we have PrepperCon that y'all do here in Atlanta, correct?
There's no other PrepperCon than what happens in Utah right now. They should be expanding it, but I haven't heard details on that yet. There are other Prepper events, Prepper conventions. If it's PrepperCon, it's a violation of trademark. So I don't know.
Interested.
That'd be interesting to find out, though.
Okay. Yes, because I would really like to. I actually got your podcast from a guy that does American Survival YouTube channel.
Okay.
And he talked about y'all and talked about he was really impressed by you and basically referred me. And I think I've maybe about 2/3 of the way through your podcast. So thank you.
Wow, thank you very much.
Well, fantastic, yeah.
So
Now, we'll see what we can do about...
You're heard in Atlanta.
That's fantastic. Woohoo!
Awesome.
We'll see what we can do about the volume, and it may be something to do with the actual where we
Recording
upload
output.
the videos, because I do most of the post-production, and the sound levels are pretty darn good. So we'll try and dig in to see what. But I appreciate it and let us know about that.
Okay, then it may be my phone that's giving me the low volume on your.
Could be as
because
well.
I listen to you at work and all.
Oh, okay.
We're going to do some testing, so thank you for that. That'll give us a good baseline to work off of. And thanks for listening.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you bet. Thank you. Thanks for the call. Sure appreciate it. All right.
I should have asked him some of the different things that he focuses on and prepares for in that region.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
similar to Florida, but there's different types of. One of the cool things about the Southeast, there's so many different types of trees. There's so many different types of animals that you have to deal with. Wildlife's totally different depending on the region you're in. Like here in the city, or really any city, there's not the wildlife that you're going to get right outside.
Well, we think about all these shows like the Bear Grylls and so forth. These guys do a lot of homework before they go into that area. They consult with local experts. Turn your phone off there, Scott. What are you? Local experts and the natives and so forth, and they learn what they need to before they actually go there. So
right, and they bring in a survival expert with them as a consultant in every one of those shows.
Exactly. They're not just making it up as they go along. It's very much planned and staged even. But we're not going there. Okay, so...
But the key is knowing what you've got with you,
yes.
right? Knowing what you've got around you, knowing your terrain. So city dwelling, you don't have as many other... You don't have the wildlife, but, man, you've got vegetation. There's so much vegetation that we don't really pay attention to.
Yeah, and that's
edible inside the city.
What I'd really like to talk about is, okay, what are the pros and cons in living in each one of these areas, whether it's an urban area or a rural area, because obviously that's dramatically different, and your way you would prepare, or the gear you would get, the skills you learn, your tactics, really vary depending on where you're at, whether you're in a rural countryside with very low population or in the city with very high population. So maybe that's where we should start is discussing the population, Scott, because I think many of the preppers that I listen to, and this is kind of the line of thinking for most of us preppers is that population is dangerous, right? Mm-hmm. So most of us find ourselves in cities, whether it's urban or suburban. We live maybe on the edge of a bustling metropolis, something like that, which is definitely a little more safe, and we could get into that. But living in a city is we're here for reasons, right? We're close to work. We need to make money. What's the theory of, or the truth that there's safety in numbers?
Okay,
is something to take into account, but also in an emergency. Let's so many different trains of thought here going on in my head.
I'm having a hard time following you because you're
in an emergency. It's good to have lots of people around you, right?
Right,
because you can all work together, and we've seen this happen. From the hurricanes to earthquakes or whatever, everybody comes together. But in call it a SHTF situation, that population is possibly and most likely going to be our enemy, is going to be.
So you're talking about the difference between responding to disasters, responding to localized emergencies, versus a Teotihuacan, right? The end of the world as we know it. A game-changing or life-changing event that's not a localized disaster, but more like a national long-term or international long-term disaster,
and
right?
I think
as
the key is long-term, right?
Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to make sure I understood that as well as for our listeners.
Because I think most preppers...
they're very, very, very
They're
different.
very different. And most preppers, I think we tend to think of the SHTF long-term situation, where in reality, it's going to be like the hurricanes, like an earthquake.
It's
going to be a short
blips.
term.
It's the, oh, crap, this just happened. Okay, now we're back onto normal life, right?
I need some support. I need some resources.
6 months. Unemployment, right? I prep because growing up, my dad being, self-employed, and I've fallen into this myself, there are times where we'll go a month or 2 or 3 without an income, right? So by being self-reliant, which is really where, for me, this came from, or being a prepper came from, it was being prepared for the things you can't foresee, being prepared for the hiccups in life so that it doesn't destroy everything that you've got going on. So having, cash set aside, having, nowadays having silver set aside, having an emergency backup financial plan, right? But also food storage, a daily pantry. The stuff that you eat all the time, you should have 90-day supply minimum. So those are the types of things like basic self-reliance, gardening, those things. That's the, oh crap, we had a disaster. Okay, crisis averted. The SHTF or the Teotihuacan situation, that's where people kind of lose their minds a lot, I think.
That's where the fear kind of comes in.
And there's a lot of fear that
we're
comes
motivated
in there.
by fear.
I'm not really
prep.
worried about that. There's something to think about there, but I'm not really engaged in that as much for my preparedness. I would like to live in a smaller town, mostly so I can have alpacas and all the other stuff I want to do.
Nice
my wife doesn't want to do that. She wants to have a Walmart.
The convenience
10 miles
of living in the city,
house.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dang it, we're out of time.
Okay, we'll continue on this topic after the break. Thanks, everybody, for joining us all the way out to Atlanta and other parts of the nation, hopefully the world. You're listening to Scott and Shane here on Prepper Talk Radio, and we'll catch you guys on the other side of this break. All right, welcome back to the show. You're listening to Scott and Shane here on Prepper Talk Radio. We want to explore this topic a little bit more. As you know, Scott and I, we don't necessarily plan... We plan what we're going to talk about, but we don't talk about...
We don't bullet point it out so that we
right.
can only talk about certain things.
Exactly.
We want the show to be free-flowing. We want the callers to call in. And so we kind of go on a little tirade every once in a while. We kind of go off the map sometimes. And so, but I think it's more informative and more helpful that we do that. And so, callers impact us. Let us know. 801-254-1640.
So, yeah, we're working out these things between Scott and I here live on the radio.
Because we don't always agree. We're very like-minded, but we also have different philosophies and principles behind our preparedness. Actually, during the break, we just started talking about the difference between, let's really focus on the people in an SHTF scenario, right? there's benefits and there's definite drawbacks to living in a highly populated area. The benefit is you've got more resources as far as manpower.
It's a better support system. It's always good, even when you're working on a team in, say, your job. Working by yourself can be difficult to stay motivated and stay upbeat and to compete against each other, right? It's kind of the same thing in an emergency, and I'll use that word, an emergency, kind of meaning short term, right?
Okay.
So say, again, referring back to the hurricanes here, what do people do? They step up, and the best of the people comes out, they love to help their fellow men.
The cream rises. The good stuff goes to the top. We get things done. I mean, look at the Cajun Navy. I think they're one of the best examples to me of how to take care of your neighbor in a disaster. They were there. They kind of showed up for Katrina, right? And that's where we all of a sudden learned about the Cajun Navy. And they came up with all their swamp boats. They came up with everything and anything they could do, resource-wise, tools, trucks, and everything. They just rolled into town.
Yeah, really cool.
And they just started rescuing people. And they had their own radios, and they were just taking care of business.
They weren't looking for direction from any authority of any kind. They just knew what they needed to do, get it done.
And then in Harvey's scenario, guess who rolls into town again? Cajun Navy. I mean, that is the perfect example. Take away all the flaws and the errors and anything else that they made, but that's the perfect example of how a community can respond. And how a lot of the right people can can avert a disaster, can help us recover from a disaster faster.
Yeah.
And that can even be used in an SHTF situation. The problem with an SHTF situation is, okay, there's so many variables of what could have happened. Like if it's a pandemic, well, all of a sudden your city of 500,000 people might be 3,000.
Exactly.
It might be 12,000.
Let's flip the tables there. So say this emergency turns into an extended event of some sort.
Okay.
If it's localized, then yes, others like the Cajun Navy can come in and help out the locals and help them get back on their feet. But if it's not only extended event, but
let's just say nationalized
event of some sort, or even worldwide event, like
a
financial collapse or whatever it might be, where our resources are being cut off. So take a large city. They're not producing much of anything inside the city itself in the way of to feed the people, supplies, medical supplies, all these different types of things have to come into a large city via trucks, via airplanes, whatever it might be. So after a certain period of time, this, as James Wesley Rawls calls it the golden horde, they are run short on food supplies, and that's why we're always telling you, get your food storage, get your water storage. And what happens? People start to panic and become chaotic.
Well, when you're hungry, I mean, hangry is the term we use all the time, and I think we use it laughingly.
2 hours after we have lunch, I'm
hangry.
Yeah.
Have a Snickers, you're not yourself.
Again, on-demand lifestyle.
What we've found is okay, if you go on to a 3-day fast where you're just drinking water, it completely resets your immune system and builds all new white blood cells. I mean, it's fantastic for you. But that first 24 hours, you're a monster. Everyone I've ever seen that's gone and done that, they're a monster. They're
no fun
hangry.
to be around.
They're mean. Yeah. Okay, so now you take that into a 3, 5, 6, 10-week scenario. They're really starving. People are really hungry. They're not going to be the nicest all the time. Yeah, especially if they think this is our last meal or my kids are starving and I need to help them. So our decision process is going to be a little off.
And especially depending on where you live, whether it's in a rural area or, in an urban area, city dwelling. So as I was kind of getting to earlier, is that most of us preppers that are maybe more intense, our theory is you've got to get away from people. So living in a city, a densely populated area, people will eventually become your enemy. Will eventually become the most dangerous element of the society. And like you say, depending on the resources, what's coming in, what kind of help you're getting, and how long this event is. So living in a city, I think that's, in my opinion, this is the number one consideration that you need to take into account when there's an emergency or a SHTF event, is the population itself.
So I think you also have to consider two things in that, right? One is your viewpoint of that population accurate?
Okay.
Okay. And two, if they're that bad to begin with, Why are you living there?
There we
now?
go. There we go.
Right? I don't like the town that I live in all that much because of its geography and location. But the people are pretty nice, especially in the neighborhood that I'm in. Man, I've got fantastic
They're going
neighbors.
to step up, and everybody's going to help each other.
And I really, truly feel that in a disaster and in a long-term SHTF scenario, there's a lot of people there that'll thrive through that because they'll work together. Now, there's other towns I've lived in where I know that's not the case. When I lived in Orange, the city of Orange, when I was in California, it was almost like everyone for themselves. We're all competing against each other financially. Who's got the nicest car? And that was a kind of a clunky town compared to like Newport Beach, where it's even crazier, uber wealthy, right? But in a crap hits the fan scenario, I wouldn't have wanted to live in that area. Number one, because there's no way to renew your resources.
So you're saying we should really look closely at each of our communities where we live, or maybe where we find ourselves often for work or whatever, and try and evaluate, what would it be like in a long-term scenario here?
Yeah, what resources do you have? I mean, living in a major, urban environment, there's really not many food resources, right?
It's what you have stored up.
Now,
because we know in an emergency, or even before an emergency, before the hurricanes, stores were empty, virtually.
Oh yeah. Well, okay. So Seattle, for example, has a place called the Brandon Street Orchard. It's a community orchard, right in the middle of town. There in Boston, they have the Walking Freedom Trail, fruit, growing everywhere, right, and it's community. Now, what do we have in Salt Lake or Davis counties or Orem? I mean, what do we really have?
I'm sure there's community gardens here and there that the locals have or they're working on or aware of.
Itsy bitsy, like if you go down to Sugar House, they've got community gardens. It's fenced in. You rent your little plow of dirt, and that's how it works, right? Same thing in Daybreak, South Jordan. But there's also, there's small orchards all throughout. If you go up into Weber and further north, you're going to see a lot more orchards. You go up to Brigham City, there's tons of peaches up there.
Well, even in Orem, there's still quite a few orchards.
There's some orchards, right? So that's a resource. Okay, well, where's your water coming from?
But it's also private property.
It's also private property.
Yeah.
But in a SHTF scenario, that's when your negotiating skills and your community...
Hopefully it's gonna be that way where you can then barter for their goods for what you hopefully have something to barter with.
Absolutely.
But in a more extreme, let's say you threw out the word pandemic.
Okay.
Now let's throw the pandemic situation into a large city. What's the disadvantage of living in a large city when a pandemic hits?
There are so many people with so many germs and everything's flying everywhere.
Exactly.
So that's the case where you have to have a clean room. And in any situation, you're going to want to have a clean room, right? You want to be able to create an environment inside your home or wherever you are that you can keep completely contaminant-free.
So, yeah, that brings up the topic. Okay, if I'm living in a city, when should I bug out? Should I bug out at all? Or should I just figure out how to shelter in place, like you say, and set up a safe zone that's secure, that's free of contaminants, that you can lock yourself in for even weeks at a time to deal with a pandemic? Or do I take the opportunity to get out early and go to Grandma's house out in the country, right?
There's I'm trying to remember his name, Charlie Hogwart? That's not right. All of a sudden,
I don't know who you're
there's a guy. He's from Florida. He actually wrote a really good book. He talks about understanding security in your community, understanding how to create safer environments, how to identify threats, as far as psychologically with people in advance before disaster goes. So he actually you're basically running kind of a security ops type thing with your entire community to understand who's who long before something happens.
That sounds awfully time-consuming and difficult.
He says it's easy.
Really?
Just making, and what it is it's talking to people. It's re-engaging with your community.
When you live in a ward, right?
Okay.
That's much easier to accomplish that, I would think, than if you didn't know your neighbors like we tend to know in the church here, right?
Right.
So, pandemic. Think of how fast germs can spread and do spread in a highly populated area, compared to a rural area where your neighbor may be, 40 acres away.
Right.
So that's where I see population as being more dangerous. But then I also think, okay, I would love to move to a rural area, right? So I can be more self-sufficient, maybe have some animals, like you say, alpacas. You are further away from the population, but then again, I would miss all the people around me.
See, I would like to be in that kind of environment where I've got 5 to 10 acres, but I've got at least a city of 1,000 to 3,000 right there, right? That's kind of my ideal. Mm-hmm. You've got more resources, you've got more people, you've got the benefits of the on-demand life that we're enjoying right now, but you also have that, hey, we're already where we want to be. We don't have to relocate unless something major forces us to, right?
Yeah, and I guess my next question is, okay, how close is that to a large city like Salt Lake City? How close do you really want to be to 1.5 million people when a pandemic hits and everyone starts to leave the cities? That's what James Wesley Rawls calls the Golden Horde. So are you far enough away to where they can't reach you, or are you close enough to where everything's still convenient? So when we think about how to create our plan, I think that's the key word is planning.
Planning, absolutely.
Is planning where you want to live, where you want to find yourself eventually. Make that plan and start working toward making plans and steps toward that. Like my plan is I want to be as far away from here as possible.
Okay.
But
I'm going to miss you.
I know. I'm going to miss you too. Just come with me. We'll get everybody and we'll create our own community.
That's so
You're going one way,
away.
I'm going the other way. It's
sad.
Far away. That's really sad for me because I want to be around you guys. I want to be around all my good friends. But I don't know.
You've already decided you're going to some weird random place that nobody else wants to go yet.
Well, exactly. Nobody else wants to. They do want to go there temporarily,
for vacation,
right? For vacation.
For vacation. See, I want to. Here's the problem. There's a lot of people that think, well, okay, I'll bug out and I'll find this other location. Mm-hmm. That's a complete false narrative in your own mind. Mm-hmm. You cannot just bug out to a new location without having resources stockpiled there, without having something going on there that's maintaining it. Because if you're not there and no one else is there, number one, it's not secure. If you're not there and no one else is there, number two, it's degrading. It's falling apart. Nature's taking over. Okay? Number three, how many other people have driven through that area and thought, because it's not secure, maybe this will work for me too.
That's another point.
And identified it as, quote unquote, their own.
A target.
So now you've got other challenges, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There are definitely challenges to living in a rural area, and there are challenges living in a city.
Oh, yeah.
A big city.
Now, rurally, the benefits, though, of being rural, or even on the edge of the suburban lifestyle, because the suburban's kind of the balance in between, right? Mm-hmm. Larger lots,
that's
you
where
can
I find
garden,
myself right now. That's kind of where
I'm kind of in the suburban area, but I'm up on a hill where I can't really do anything. My land is
other than go up into
awkwardly
the hill,
shaped, right? I can go further into the hill, but I can't renew my resources. Mm-hmm. It's all scrub oak. Mm-hmm. It's all crap. Mm-hmm. It's a mountain of tinder ready to light up at any minute, as evidence from a few months ago when it did. Mm-hmm. A friend of mine, a good friend of yours as well, his property lit on fire.
And he took jam around all his neighbors afterwards.
Yep, he took jam to all his neighbors to apologize and thank them for not going crazy on him.
That's another thing to evaluate when you live in a city. Is okay if you're holed up and you've got a good location. Say you're in an apartment, right?
Okay.
And you feel secure. You've got your supplies. You're on an upper level, so you feel safe. So what would a bad guy do, who knows that you're there, can't get into your place? How would he get you out of there?
Well, it depends on why he's there. If he's just there to cause problems, all he has to do is light a fire on the lower level.
There you go.
Right. If he's there to get your resources. There's a number of different things.
He doesn't want to bring your resources out, but he wants to get you out of there. And that's another thing is that just came to my mind is gangs, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, there'll be roving gangs. I mean,
and they're going to grow. And
anytime there's a major shift, there are people, opportunists, and there are the status quo group that everyone's looking for new leadership, right? Mm-hmm. And then there becomes the power play of, well, this is my territory, right? We become very territorial. We go back to the very tribal type of people. So who is our tribe? What's the makeup of that tribe? And if you do any research on that, you're going to find there's a lot of different psychologies within that, and there's a benefit to finding that tribe. One of the things I read last night talked about how one of the mental illness issues that's going on in America right now is primarily because we're avoiding tribes. We're avoiding communication, interpersonal connectivity, and a lot of it is also because we're not engaging anyone else's emotions and letting people feel. And to have a tribe gives you those opportunities. So psychologically, you're going to do better.
And that's why gangs are so popular, and people want to be part of a
They
group
want to be
of some
accepted.
sort.
They want to be part of something bigger than themselves.
And we all need to be, but it needs to be. Call it a prepper group. Call it a mutual assistance group. Whatever you want to call it.
A community.
A community of some sort.
Right.
Yeah,
it's a community. So how do we create the community that's going to make this most sense and that's going to work for us in a post-apocalyptic whatever scenario, right? I'm not thinking everything's going to fall into Mad Max. I really don't think it's going to get that bad. I think that's everybody that talks about post-apocalyptic scenarios, they get really Hollywood. And I think it's going to be more like the Dust Bowl scenario, the Great Depression scenarios. Let's talk about that more after the break.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for listening. You're listening to Scott and Shane here on Prepper Talk Radio. And we'll catch you guys after the break. Feel free to call in with any comments you might have. All right, welcome back for the break. We still have a lot to talk about here, and we want to get right back into it. You're listening to Scott and Shane here on Prepper Talk Radio. You can connect with us on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're, of course, PrepperTalkRadio.com.
Booyah.
You can listen to us on iHeartRadio, on Spreaker. We sure love interacting with you guys. It helps us to try and orient our message to what you really need to hear. Because, we have our opinions,
Yep.
And they're strong opinions, but we want to change our message according to what you need to hear. That's why we're here. I mean, otherwise, why are we even here? Okay,
so I found that contact.
Okay,
Charlie, if you go to readygoprep.com, he's got
Charlie. Okay, that's right.
He's got all of his stuff there, and he's got a book on kind of understanding your neighborhood for security planning and evacuation routes and stuff like that. So it's really good stuff.
Cool. Yeah, he's been around for a long time. He knows his stuff, definitely.
He's a certified disaster inspector and planner. So he's got a lot of interesting certifications.
Cool. So we're talking urban versus rural prepping for the environment that you find yourself in.
I keep feeling like we're doing a disservice to suburban. So urban, suburban, and rural.
Okay, so you want to throw suburban in there. I'm kind of lumping suburban in with urban. It's kind of city
totally
but
different.
It's kind of
totally
in the
different.
middle, in between.
Because we live in an area where our urban and suburban intermix a lot.
Yes,
it bleeds over a lot, right?
That's true.
But we really don't have a true urban area.
Okay, other than maybe like downtown.
A 4-block section of downtown is really urban, and the rest of it's.
But I consider urban really anywhere along the Wasatch Front where you don't have immediate access to, say the mountains or to government land, whatever, to BLM land or any rural area.
See, having lived in Tampa, there's a very urban area there, right? Having been to New York. That's all.
Yeah, we're still a pretty small city here compared to some of these
tiny,
other
so
cities,
they're going to look at us and laugh when we say we're very urban, because we're not.
Right, we're definitely more suburban in many cases than just urban. So no, you're absolutely correct there.
But I think you brought up the good point that there's a lot of resources are highly restricted in both of those areas, whereas in a rural area, you have more freedom to be able to grow what you want to grow. But then it all comes down to resources to be able to replicate.
The infrastructure is not there like it is, in an urban area. There's fewer people, so there's fewer resources that way.
Well, and if you go to the Midwest and then all the way to the East Coast, I mean, they've got rainfall enough to be able to sustain growing their own garden.
Yep.
They've got rainfall to sustain livestock. They've got enough water flow and rainfall to really be more self-sufficient, whereas here we have to find a way to get that water to where we are.
Because we're the second driest state in the nation.
Yep.
But I think we also need to consider that with population. That's kind of the thing I always go back to is population. The fewer people, the fewer resources that have to be distributed to those people, right? So in a rural area, you tend to have more natural resources, but then you have to have the skills and knowledge how to get those and where to get them, how to use them, right?
Okay.
Whereas you don't have that in an urban area. Try and collect water on a roof in Utah. You're just not going to get as much as you need.
Yeah, there's just not much to catch.
Well, we've got a call here. Let's go ahead and take this call, see what comment we've got there. Hello, you're live here on Prepper Talk Radio. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi guys. I call in every once in a while. I'm from this valley. Been a farmer down here in a while. You guys are LDS, aren't you?
We sure
are. I think you live out in the Eagle Mountain area.
I'm in Utah County. Scott is North Davis.
Davis County.
Oh.
So neither of us are actually in Eagle Mountain area.
What's that?
Neither of us are are from the Eagle Mountain area.
Maybe it was some other guys that listen to. But anyway, so what do you think about, just kind of bat this around a little bit, is this like the United Order deal and the LDS Church having all this property and being able to utilize it, not only utilize it, what I mean by that is putting it into gardens instead of, growing a bunch of hay for milk cows or, that usually all the dairy farmers has to be subsidized, because it's not economical to grow all that alfalfa and that. And then the other problem is the laws we have. We're a nation of laws, and we have an executive order that could be put in place at any time where the government can take over the farms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They can also take your food storage, thanks to
sure.
Your own vehicles. If they deem it necessary, they come take your own transportation.
Yeah.
They can take any of your commodities, and so where does it? Where do we draw the line there? And I was just curious, is because the only way I can see this working, there's so much, because I've been kind of planning this for over 20 years, and there's just no way to get that middle between urban and suburban and rural area, because all of a sudden, if you need one thing or if you start planting something, you're going to be married to that property for at least 2 years minimum, or 3 or 4 or 5 or who knows how long.
Yeah, it's definitely a long-term thought process you need to go through, and I think I kind of understand where you're going with, what to do with the church land and so forth. I think that's just going to work itself out. I think we need to make our own plans, not rely on anybody else, maybe as a backup or an emergency plan to use some of those resources. But I think we need to really focus on what we can do ourselves and our immediate circle of friends and family and neighborhood that we can coordinate right now, rather than trying to speculate what might happen in the future.
I think that also comes into play with, key component of that is communication, right? Communication and planning, and part of that I think is the value, and this is where I really got to smack myself because I keep putting this off, but getting a ham radio license and a ham radio and understanding how to use it.
Yeah, that's where
because then you can use that for trade and barter communication to find out, what resources do you guys have extra of that we might be lacking in, and what do we have extra of that you might be lacking in? And then you can start, that's where rebuilding really comes into play, is that communication, that planning. And I think a lot of us forget that when we start thinking of the SHTF scenarios. We're like, we just go into survival mode of we're just going to get through this. Well, what's on the other side of this?
Right.
It's
lock
that
yourself
rebuilding.
in your house and shut everybody else out, and you're the focus of all your efforts and nobody else.
And you're going to have to come together as a group and repurpose a lot of things. I mean, if it's really that bad of a scenario, we're going to have to repurpose a lot of things. So talking about the United Order, meaning everything is shared, right? Everything is communal to a degree, right? Everyone is given, they take what they get, they put it into the, I guess we'll just say, we'll put it in the kitty, right? And then everyone's distributed back out what they need, and whatever's left over goes into storage, right, for against harsh times. But the whole premise is that everyone has to be committed to contributing to that, right? And what they found back when they really did it is it was very, very effective. Now, as soon as someone gets greedy, that's when there's a problem. Yeah, there's always going to be that challenge of fighting against that greed.
We appreciate the call. We're going to let you go. Had the other lines ringing, but we're down to our last couple of minutes here of the show, and we want to make sure to touch on a few other topics. But thank you very much for that call. That's it's definitely something to consider as we move forward with your plans. Is the larger picture rather than just focusing on ourselves and being selfish that way. So let's grab another phone call here. You're live here on Prepper Talk Radio. You had a question or a comment for us?
Oh, years ago, it was probably 20 years, the church sold all their farms in this valley anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They're all just been all sold to developers, you know.
Yeah,
Last
I was
one was
sad to see
South
those go.
Jordan, you know. Last one was South Jordan up 114th that I remember. And where the big Walmart is out in Riverton on the 134th South. That was, I used to farm that too, and do all of them, what do you call it? Well, a friend of mine was renting it, but that all got developed. But anyway, you just have to, I don't know how you're going to get irrigation to little plots of land. I mean, there's just no way you can do it.
That infrastructure is going away because of development.
Well, the culinary will
being
be
abandoned.
gone.
Yep. So the key then goes to community. You
Thanks for
have
the
to
call.
create a community that people have responsibilities, right? Certain groups going to be taking on the water filtration or gathering water. You know, there's going to be so many different jobs that need to be done. So that's why I'm like, man, if you go super rural and you don't have a team, you're screwed. I'm sorry, but
it's quite the conundrum for me.
There's so many people that are like, oh, I'm just going to move to the mountains and I'm going to survive. I'm like, bull crap.
Yeah.
I'm going to call crap on that.
Okay, let's try and take one more call here before we go here. This seems to be a hot topic. You're live here on Prepper Talk Radio. Go ahead.
This is Brad calling. I wanted to point out something that nobody thinks about, and that is just as soon as... Am I on?
Yeah, you're live.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, just as soon as you leave your domain, your abode, your status changes to that of a refugee. You are no longer a resident of a neighborhood or a city. You are now a refugee. Think about that. And the places most people are thinking of heading to are already peopled by inhabitants, and they're not going to take kindly to the hordes of fleeing refugees from the big bad city with the intent of squatting on their land.
That's correct.
Okay, so the question is, where are you going to go? You're going to get the most bleak, desolate, God-forsaken land that's left over. You might even have military, armed BLM out there. So think about these things.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is absolutely the key. You need to have the plan, and you need to execute that plan early.
Well, it's kind of interesting that you bring that up because, you know, it's something I've thought about a few times. We should have been talking about that before here on the show, but that's actually how Utah came to be. You know, the Mormons left everywhere else because there was nothing left, and they came here, and it was the most desolate, ugly place they could ever go to.
Well, but they go about the Indians, too.
Yeah.
The Indians didn't take kindly to being invaded.
Yeah. And so
that's a psychological factor nobody thinks about.
I think that's a great point, and I'm actually really glad you brought that up because we have to consider that. Bugging out is only to be used when you're relocating to a place you're already a member of that community.
Sure, but when you got thousands of desperate people, that's problematic with the logistics.
Yeah, that's another thing to consider is that, okay, wherever you're going, how many other people are going there as well? Is it going to be better off for you to stay where you're at and try and shelter in place? These are some tough questions, I tell you. You've got
and again, those people are going to jealously guard their land.
Yep.
Okay,
Absolutely.
and so it's like you keep on moving.
Where do you go? So the ultimate question is, where do you go? And
how
do you,
crazy,
or where
perhaps?
do you stay?
You go crazy. There you go.
Where do you go to go crazy? Hey, thank you so much for calling.
All right, good show.
Very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
That was. I think that's one of the best points I've heard today. Is you become a refugee. You know, and it kind of goes back to this whole argument that we've heard over the last year of not letting refugees come to the United States. It's like, you know what? Someday we're going to be refugees too. So how do we treat those people? How do we work together with those? How do we vet those people?
I mean, this really is the quintessential prepper topic. You know, and kind of unintended to go to this direction, but, you know, city versus rural prepping, which is better? Where should we go? I think eventually, if you're living in a big city, my conclusion is you got to get out. But you got to get out early, and you have to know where you're going. You have to be prepared. You don't want to be a refugee. So that's my conclusion. And one thing that I'm subscribed to pretty wholeheartedly is getting away from the populations, but still having a community. So how do you do that? That's just not an easy thing to do. So you got to get started on the plans early and work on it now, so that when that happens, start to change your lifestyle now, so that when it happens, when the change happens, it's no big change for you. You know, your life has already changed. Well, we got about I don't know if we have enough time to take this last caller here.
Let's roll the dice.
Give it a try. Okay. You're live here on Prepper Talk Radio. Got a few seconds left. Go right ahead.
Yeah, just a few. Yeah, I used to go to the singles dances,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, for people 50 or whatever, that don't matter. But anyway, I ran into this chick, and she was in charge of the church tent cities and the church preparation committees.
There's our music.
Interesting.
And she says we're all ended up in tents.
Well,
maybe the
very
case.
well could be.
There's the rumor of the call out that may be
Yeah,
the
she
case.
says it isn't a rumor. Said they're just going to call
I don't know if I
everybody
believe
up.
in that.
Well, we
all
will
believe.
ultimately find out when we're faced with it. So you've been listening to Prepper Talk Radio. We're out of time. We'll be back next Friday. Thanks for listening and being part of the Prepper Talk community.
Hey guys, it's Scott and Shane at Prepper